Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Cameron Wendt, and I'm Communications Lead at Palantir Technologies. I have the pleasure today of introducing the American Swiss Foundation and the speakers for today's program. Most of you are familiar with the American Swiss Foundation, which was founded in 1945 with the mission to deepen the friendship between these two countries. This friendship goes back over 2 centuries to when Switzerland and the United States were called the sister republics, with shared democratic values, including liberty, the rule of law, and free enterprise. The main program of the ASF is a Young Leaders Conference, which has been held in Switzerland since 1990. My own personal connection to the program is I was a young leader in 2019 and have more recently joined the American Swiss Foundation Board of Directors. Today's conversation will explore the important role of air transportation on the Swiss economy. As the CEO of the Geneva Airport has stated, the Swiss airports serve as the foundation for an international country. This system acts as the driver for Switzerland's diverse trade and traffic flows, enabling investments from individuals, tourists, corporations across industries. This global investment into Switzerland is largely made possible by this aviation ecosystem. We'll look to our speakers today for their insights on how Swiss Air regards its role in the economy, how it strives for increased efficiencies, and how it plans for and executes future-proofing. At Palantir, we're seeing AI and LLMs begin to materially transform the operations for our customers across government and commercial sectors. Swiss is making decisions like these every day that have the potential to impact the economic landscape of an entire country. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers, and then I'll hand it to them for discussion. Gieri Hinnen was a fellow young leader actually same year. We were together in 2019. He began a Swiss career when he joined the External Affairs Unit in 2009, and then went on to take over Swiss Strategic Communications, prior to serving as head of labor relations and HR steering. Currently, he works with Swiss World Cargo Sales Organization to provide best-in-class air freight services and solutions to their customers worldwide. As a member of the cargo management team, he also contributes to defining Swiss World Cargo's future strategic direction concerning sustainability, forward-looking innovations, and digitalization in their air freight activities. We'll also hear from Willa, a young leader from 2023. Marco is responsible for the sales, distribution, management, and services of all of the airlines of Lufthansa Group within the Swiss market. He assumed his present position heading Lufthansa Group's sales and distribution team for the UK, Irish, and Icelandic markets in 2017. Prior to this, he spent 3 years as a global account manager based in Zurich. He previously gained experience in product management at Swiss as well. Finally, our moderator for today's session is Kent Lassman. Kent is president and CEO at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and was a young leader in 2017. He oversees strategy for this free market organization, including management of a team of policy, communications, and fundraising staff. Prior to joining CEI, Kent was vice president at a public affairs firm in Washington, D.C. Having held positions in nonprofit organizations, advisory councils, private firms, and policy organizations, he's a recognized expert in free market economics and strategic marketing. Kent, would you kick us off?
Cameron, thank you very much for the introduction and for the American Swiss Foundation for hosting this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for some time because in my role working on public policy in America, all too often I'm dealing with people who think about things but don't do things. And our guests today are real leaders in the private markets, solving problems for people, delivering people and goods and ideas across our countries and across borders. So without much preamble, I would like to jump right into a conversation so we can understand the air transport market, its effects, the types of things and people and places that it touches in our lives. And we'll start with Marco. And I invite you, Marco, to tell us a little bit about Swiss Air and the Lufthansa Group and just what your footprint looks like, what the company is and where it reaches, and how we should understand the priorities there at Swiss Air.
Thank you, Kent, and also thank you, Cameron, for introducing us. Let me kick this off with a fun fact. And the fun fact is that outside of Switzerland, Swiss is still known as Swiss Air. You just heard it, Kent. Cameron, you call us Swiss Air, which is fine. But technically, we are called Swiss International Airlines. And I want to talk a little bit about it. What's the difference? So the difference is Swiss Air was founded in 1931. So, and after 70 years of existence in 2001, shortly after 9/11, Swiss Air went bankrupt. Huge emotional story still in Switzerland. You can feel it that Swiss Air, that was our flying bank. So Swiss Air did not exist anymore. Then in 2001, the government and our Swiss banks had the choice, do we save Swiss Air or do we create a new airline? And actually, out of this demise of Swiss Air, Swiss International Airline was born in 2001, and we used an existing regional airline, a small little carrier based in Basel called Crossair, to create Swiss. So Swiss was born in 2001. So basically, we just had some 22, 23 years of existence now, but it's a relatively young company. And it's important to know that Swiss, as it is today, is privately owned, so there's no state involvement. Swiss was bought in 2005 by the Lufthansa Group, integrated, we should say, but still remained independent. So Swiss has an own board, also an own supervisory board, and is still the home carrier and the national airline of Switzerland without the government involvement. That's very important to mention. What else can I say about Swiss? We are an airline that serves in the premium segment. What does that mean? If you go on a long-haul flight with Swiss, you'll always consistently find a first class. So we're the only large airline that offers a first-class compartment on every single long-haul flight. So that clearly pushes us up in the premium segment. We employ about 7,000 people, roughly about 7,000 people in Switzerland. We're within the top 500 companies in Switzerland. And within the last 3 years, we have employed about 2,500 people who fly for us, so cabin and cockpit crew. And that's probably one of the largest employment waves in Switzerland from any company which we had. So we're also, as an employer, very important to Switzerland. Maybe one last word about the relevance of the US for Swiss, and then I hand over to Gieri to talk about the cargo side of the business. If you look at the passenger business and the US, I have a revenue responsibility for Switzerland, and if you take that revenue and analyze how much of that is due to the US, so the link between Switzerland and the US, I can't reveal numbers, but it's significant. It's a huge stake of my budget is the US, only then followed by Asia, with 3 countries in there, India, China, and Japan. But the US is by far the most important traffic region for me and for Swiss here in Switzerland. And that's quite interesting because we only fly to 7 airports in the US. I can come to that later. We will also launch Washington in March. We're really excited about that. At the moment, the current aircraft fleet size is 88 aircraft. We have both Airbus and Boeing, but our flagship aircraft is the American Boeing 777, which we also use for the West Coast US operation. Yeah, that's maybe a good first start to identify what's the difference between Swiss Air and Swiss. We're immensely proud to be the home carrier of Switzerland. We're also proud of having very close connections to the US. We have an organization in the US which supports us here. And maybe also on the cargo side, Gieri, you can add a few words about us.
Thank you. So while Marco takes care of the people, we take care of the containers and goods. So Swiss World Cargo is basically the Swiss brand for our cargo operations. And what we do is we sell the bellies of our planes. So we don't have own freighters. Unlike other big carriers, we really only sell the bellies of our planes. And just to put this in perspective, if you would have you mentioned the Boeing, I think a Boeing freighter has about 100 tons of space where you can transport goods. We have about 25 tons in our Boeing that we can sell. So, and our network is based on passenger demand, and we basically tag along and say, what can we then fill in terms of cargo? And where we specialized in is similar a little bit to what Marco talked about in terms of premium carrier. We specialize in high value, care intensive and time intensive goods. So basically a little bit given what Switzerland does economically and what Swiss stands for, it's, you know, the watches, the high tech, the machinery, the gold, so stuff like this we're known for and specialized in. And at the same time, we also do, of course, transport the regular goods. So let's say the bananas and the other perishables or big machinery. Just to what we can't do is because we don't have a big freighter, we can't do horses or big artworks. So it's really the belly of the planes that we sell as Swiss Rail Cargo. And in terms of size, I mean, Marco mentioned the network or the planes we have. I think it's about 100 destinations, 88 planes, if I get it right. Number always changes a bit. And we employ about 300 people just only for cargo. And I think about 40 of those are based in the US. So the workforce outside of Switzerland of Swiss Rail Cargo, I think it's around 20% based in the US. Yeah, I think that's about it for a start for Swiss Rail Cargo.
Gieri, this is extremely interesting as far as the model for, I think, especially the American audience. And I just want to ask you to draw out a second time to make sure that my American friends understand what makes this so special. The other carriers that we might see at an airport, Delta or American Airlines or one of the national carriers from Europe, when they transport cargo, they're using an entirely different plane. Whereas Swiss Cargo, your company, is putting things together. So if you're flying to San Francisco, you're moving both people and goods. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that we illustrate this.
Yeah, exactly. We always, if we have a flight, there's people in there and there's cargo in there. And the difference to other carriers who operate more freighters is that what we have is a steady network. So usually we have 7 days a week in operation throughout the year. So you can count on us transporting your cargo all year long, every day. Whereas freighters are usually a little bit more scheduled, let's say twice a week, or also changing depending on seasonalities and so on. And but just of course, other airlines do the same. You know, the Deltas and the Uniteds also transport cargo in their bellies. We just do it. What we do is we do it exclusively. We don't have any additional freighters in operation.
So in a very subtle way, this is a way of linking by tightening the relationship, not having just fixed schedules for cargo, but the always-on availability of your network. It links the two countries and our supply chains and our manufacturing and other networks. Marco, could I ask you to talk about, just to illustrate for us, the 7 cities that you mentioned? How did those get selected? For example, I know we've visited in the past about San Francisco and some very important facilities there to Swiss companies. How do you go about the selection process for where to fly?
Very good question, Kent. Those 7 are traditional big cities, so we don't take a massive amount of risk. So I can maybe name them quickly. So it's New York, both airports, Newark and JFK. We have Boston, we have Miami, we have San Francisco, we have LAX, we have Chicago, and then from March we also have Washington. So that would be, with the 2 airports in New York, would be 8. So I give you an example. When we started San Francisco, you just mentioned San Francisco. What we typically look at is traffic flow, so demand on other airlines. So we have market share data. We analyze demand across the industry and see what are typical traffic flows. We operate in a hub system, meaning we don't only connect people from Zurich to San Francisco, but maybe also from anywhere else in Europe, connecting in Zurich and then to San Francisco. or going to San Francisco and beyond. So we look at the whole network, and then we analyze, are there any corporates or companies in general that show a large interest in contributing to the route, or if they approach us and say, hey, we have headquarters in San Francisco, please connect these cities. Then we look at that part, but also what is the leisure and touristic demand to that destination. And San Francisco was a typical case where we invested with a large pharmaceutical company in Switzerland together in the route, and we launched it also because of their commitment, and it has been a success case ever since. I can't remember the year when we launched it, but it was a joint collaboration between Switzerland-based corporations and us to launch such a route. So business is important for us when we launch new destinations. And the same goes for Washington. Washington, I mean, flying to the capital, it's quite obvious, but also there we count on a lot of corporate contribution flying to Washington and beyond to support us on the route.
And just to build on this, when you do this analysis of a new route, you then also add the possible cargo flows. So is there any steady flow of goods, for instance, between Switzerland and New York? I mean, there is obviously a steady flow of goods in both ways. So you add to this, and this then makes the route. This gives the route the whole profitability, or the overall profitability. And with the same logic that Marco mentioned, it's basically the route between Switzerland and New York, and also on beyond. So there might be traffic from, I don't know, Milano to Zurich to New York.
And do you see, I'll invite either of you to answer this question. Do you see either political leaders or maybe business economists in Switzerland coming to you after seeing these routes developed and mature and giving you indications of how important that is to the economy? Because of when you're shipping engineers back and forth between headquarters, they're also doing things like hotel stays and renting cars and eating meals and visiting with friends and for leisure travel. Those sorts of economic impact analyses, I know you try to make predictions, but do they come after the fact and inform future policymakers?
I can maybe start. I think definitely our politicians do recognize the value we bring as a home carrier to connect not just Europe, but the world with Switzerland. It's immensely important for trade in general. I mean, Switzerland, we have, I think, 33 free trade agreements throughout the globe, and we need that in order for such a small country as Switzerland to survive. To be very honest, and that's maybe a bit my personal opinion, politics in Bern could use this fact a little bit more to my liking, because I think right now the whole discussion in Europe is a lot about sustainability and how does flights, etc., harm our environment, but they keep forgetting the value it adds to an economy. So but that's a personal remark. I think there we could focus more on the value such a network brings to a country. But Gieri, maybe you can add also a few words.
Yeah, so I fully agree. I think when we talk to associations, also the media, some parts of the media, it's fully recognized that what Swiss adds to the Swiss economy is a lot of direct connections. And given the size of Switzerland, also given the size of Zurich, it's excellently connected. And it really, I mean, given that Switzerland is a hub for many multinational companies, especially American ones, it's very much recognized that without air transport, this economic attractiveness of Switzerland would not be there. And I think, I mean, you mentioned at the very beginning the demise of Swissair and the founding of Swiss International Airlines. And in this discussion 20 years ago, I mean, this was a lot discussed. Can we survive as Switzerland without a national carrier? And I think 22 years later, we now see basically the benefit that a hub carrier in their own country brings.
So I know your government there in Bern is currently working on free trade agreements or mutual recognition agreements with multiple countries. So we've discussed there's 33 in place for Switzerland around the world. You're working on Vietnam and Malaysia, some Mercosur countries in Central and South America. That suggests to me, just listing those countries that are on the deck that you're working on, that it's more than an export demand for your country, that it's also you want people and ideas coming back to Switzerland, because there's only so many high-end luxury goods that will be exported to Central America. But you also are interested in developing the bi-directional relationship. Could you talk a little bit, Gieri, first about the nature or the size of that relationship and the potential with America, that bi-directional investments, and how much value are these goods that are coming from New York or Miami into Switzerland and vice versa?
Yes, I can start. So when looking at export and imports, so in 2022, I think the US was the biggest export market for Switzerland, around 50 billion per year, and ahead of Germany, I think. So it's in terms of exports, it's our biggest market. And if you compare this, I mean, to the other big global player, China, for us as an export market, I think it ranks fifth with about 15 billion per year. So the US is a really important market for us as exports. And if you look at the goods we export, it's a lot of chemicals, pharma, machinery, and then the valuables. So the ones that you mentioned. And it's changing a little bit, but pharma being still 40 to 50% share in terms of exports. And in terms of imports, depends a little bit on the statistics, but the US, I think, is the second biggest market for us in terms of imports. So you see the close connection of the two countries. And again, in terms of imports and goods, it's again mostly pharma, medical equipment, machinery, but then also perishables, the avocados or the asparagus from California, for instance. So, and this is actually growing. I think in 2022, it was 8% growth. So you see the connection in terms of goods and manufacturing is growing between the US and Switzerland. And then if it comes back to Swiss World Cargo's role, I think in terms of value, 2/3 of this is transported by air transport. So you cannot ship it by maritime. It's really transported by air cargo. So to sum up, what we see in terms of goods, we see a closer connection between the two countries, and the US becoming even more important for Switzerland than it used to be in the past. And maybe Marco, you can add.
I'm sorry, Gieri, I didn't mean to cut you off. Marco, do you also track or see evidence that when you're moving people and creating those relationships between these nodes, between Geneva and Zurich and then these American cities, that you also then see downstream increased investment, increased patents among, Google has a facility in Zurich and Roche has a facility in San Francisco. These are both innovation-driven companies that are very intellectually oriented. Are they seeing the benefit of that co-location and working through your network?
Yeah, we of course have a close look at industries in general. So we track which industries are supporting us on which routes. And as you rightfully said, pharma is one of the top industries, followed by the financial services like banks and consulting. And then, of course, tech companies like the one you just mentioned, which is huge for us. So what I would add is, if you look at foreign direct investment of Switzerland in the US and vice versa, I think we're creating jobs on both ends. So if you look at those traffic flows from the major cities to Switzerland, but also beyond, I mean, you can pick any state in the US and have a look in the public register, which, by the way, also on the Switzerland register, you can look up which Swiss companies are present there in the US. and you'll always find the same suspects. So you find insurance companies, you find cement producing companies, you all know what I'm talking about, but you find the usual suspects of Swiss companies, lift and escalator companies in almost any state. So I think what we also shouldn't forget is what kind of jobs we create by allowing Switzerland companies to invest in the US and build up affiliates there, and vice versa. So the Google switch build up a headquarter in Zurich. And by the way, they have thousands of employees here in Zurich. So it's not just that they have a little headquarter with 500 people. It's up to, I think, 3,500 or even more at Google. They focus on AI, YouTube and Gmail. That's all here in Zurich. So yeah, it's pretty big, and I would just add the fact that we're creating jobs in both countries. Yeah.
Marco, if I could stick with you for a moment, if there is a misperception that Americans have, in your experience, that Americans have with your company or your country, what is that misperception that we need to dispel?
I don't have the misperception, so Gieri, maybe you have one, but maybe people think we are a very small country, which is true, and it's all about cheese and money, which is also true, but there's more to that. I think if you look at foreign direct investment of Switzerland in the US, we rank among the top 7 countries, and within those 7 countries, we pay the highest salaries in the US for affiliates. So we're also adding value in the US as a very small, tiny country. And I think that's something which the Americans sometimes don't see, how powerful Switzerland can be if we allow trade between those 2 sister republics.
That last point is something I've been trying to explain to policymakers here in America for years. You're geographically small and an island within Europe, but tremendously important to us and tremendously valuable. Gieri, are there, you have spent time in both countries, I understand. Are there things that your neighbors, your friends at home in Switzerland misunderstand about America as it relates to this relationship, and how we could, if we dispel those myths or problems, we would maybe increase the willingness to trade more?
I think it's basically the other side of the medal that Marco just mentioned. I think what's also a little bit not seen in Switzerland is the importance of the US for Switzerland. So you mentioned Google before, but there's a lot of other companies, US companies based in Switzerland, who take Switzerland as their hub for Europe, thereby creating jobs here, creating innovation, and so on, or the academic links between the universities here and the US. So, we tend to stress in Switzerland the importance of the European Union and Germany, and which is important, and then also Asia. But we tend to forget again that the biggest export market and the second biggest one import market is the US. So it's basically the importance of specifically America or the United States for Switzerland is a little bit forgotten also in the political discussion within Switzerland.
I see. I would, I fear that sometimes Americans, we get in the way of ourselves, and we encourage the rest of the world to think about the parts of America that are not the best, in order, or subsequently they tend to start focusing on them as opposed to all the really good things that come from strong relationships. Can we talk a little bit about the workforce, both for your companies? Marco, you illustrated this a bit, but I would also like to understand, you're dealing with these big international companies, and they're moving their goods, they're moving their people back and forth. Do you have a sense of the characteristics of the people who travel or are choosing your freight options? How would we describe them demographically?
Oh, that's a very good question, because it's very diverse. But if you let's focus on the multinational corporations that do travel between the US and Switzerland. I would say that's a good point, because right in the pandemic, I was told, and we were all told, that people are not going to travel the way they're traveling. They have traveled. The corporate business will not resume. People will do all of their calls and meetings via Zoom calls, etc. But what we see is that there is a corporate recovery, as we call it. It's not on the level of 2019, which is 5 years back, but it's not on that level yet. But there's a steady recovery in the corporate sector. And what does that tell us? It tells us that people still need to meet in person. They want to close deals. They want to do product trainings if they're a technology company and they need to provide training. If they are selling machinery and they need to offer training, if they want to close big deals, you need to be there in person. So that's one thing which they all have in common. This face-to-face meeting people in person business is still there, and it's important. And maybe a second factor is that those companies that work on a remote basis, some have closed the offices and have their team spread out throughout the whole of the US, for instance, in multiple states. They do meet once, twice, 4 times a year in a central location, and they let people fly into that location and then do their team meeting or their conference in one place. So we see more of that much more often compared to before the pandemic. But I would say the typical traveler is a salesperson or a true expert in his or her field, meeting people in person, closing deals, having management meetings, and that hasn't changed even after the pandemic.
It's almost as if you're describing the business world in the wake of a global pandemic has taken a page and a lesson from the American Swiss Foundation and their flagship
Yes.
program for young leaders, getting people gigether so that they could later, based on these relationships, make those deals or learn from each other. Gieri, do you have anything to share? One thing we haven't talked about is innovation. We've talked about innovative companies, but the airline industry and transportation more broadly is an area of innovation, and there's constantly changes happening. Could you tell our audience a little bit about how you decide or what methods you use to determine what freight gets shipped at what time and how much everything weighs, and how do you do all the logistics on the back end to make these planes take off on time? Because for an air traveler like me, it just looks like you have magic dust. I don't know how you do this.
Oh, that's a hard question for a sales guy. I can try. So, I mean, at heart, Swiss is an operation company. I mean, this is what we're really good at in terms of passenger and in terms of cargo. And so if you have this, take a 777 flying from Zurich to New York. So usually, that's a difference to passengers, there's a 14-day window where we fill the plane with goods. There might be some stuff that it's also already pre-booked and pre-arranged, but mostly it's booked within 14 days. So what we do is, well, in terms of filling up the plane, it's basically saying, so on day one, there comes a carton of bananas, and you have to say, do I take it? To what price do I take it? Or do I wait for better cargo and then I fill it with a box of diamonds? So in this game, you basically play for 14 days before a plane leaves. And I mean, in the end, it's, in terms of filling the plane, it's a mathematical game. Well, a mathematical game is the wrong expression, but it's a mathematical simulation on which cargo we should take at what price. And so we have excellent team here that does this for a long time, also adding now a lot of data and innovation to this, so to maximize basically the profits out of one plane. And then in terms of operations, it's then really making sure that the cargo comes to the plane at the right time, is handled with the right care, and then is delivered. And this might sound easy, but if you take, for instance, pharma, with pharma, a lot of it has to be with a certain temperature. So you have to make sure that you keep the temperature. And also it has to be time sensitive. There's some products which has to be delivered from production to patient within 72 hours. So you have to make sure that it goes through. And this can only be done through an ecosystem of partnerships, because we don't do it alone. We do it with the airport of Zurich and then the arrival airport and so on. So, and if you ask me how we do this, I think it's basically built on long-lasting relationships and a lot of trust, and then a high focus on Swiss quality. And I mean, especially if we look at the handling, so having a container in Zurich at the airport, I think there we have in Zurich, we have a highly skilled workforce. We have a relatively small airport. So we're really good in taking care of cargo compared to bigger hubs, which are more complex and have more problems finding the right people. I hope I answered your questions.
Yes, I think it's important to illustrate, and it was very nice how you used that example with pharmaceuticals, that these are not just pallets full of dry goods like oats or candy bars. Oftentimes these are life-saving goods, and they have very specific requirements around them, not only at the front end of the manufacturing process, the tolerances of how different companies create things that we consume and improve our lives, but then how you take care of them in the shipping matters, and it matters to the quality and expectations that customers have for what they're getting. So I'm glad that you illustrated that. I have one last question before I turn to each of you. I will turn in just a moment to invite you for any sort of wrap-up questions or comments, or if there's something that you were hoping to say and I did a poor job of asking you the right questions. But before we get there, I wanted to ask and help myself understand. Marco, you talked about, I believe, the size of the relationship and the amount of dollars or direct foreign investment, how important the export markets are to each other, these two countries. And I wonder, Gieri, does your company ship, say, a manufacturing good, equipment for a company that builds something that is maybe German or French, but it's better to send it through a Swiss airport and a Swiss cargo airplane than it is to send it through an airport in their home country? And in that way, this relationship, the importance of building this relationship, has spillover effects for people who live elsewhere. Is that the case, or am I making too much of that?
No, this is actually the case. So there might be goods that come from Milano or from Frankfurt being shipped through Zurich rather than the home airport. And so this is very much the case, and can be two drivers. One, of course, as always, can be price, but also it can be what you mentioned before, when it's about very high care, intensive goods. So for stuff we are known for, and where our customers rely on the quality of us as an operator, but also the airport of Zurich, there we actually have spillover effects with other countries.
That's really important. I know we think of that in terms of, Marco, leisure travel. Someone might come to ski or hike or do other wonderful things in the countryside of Switzerland, and then also extend their trip, and visit somewhere, the Italian Alps or whatnot. But this notion about how our goods and services are delivered, thank you for illustrating that. Marco, let me turn to you and ask, are there any points that are really important that we haven't had a chance to get to yet? And Gieri, in just a moment, I'll ask you the same.
I think we covered pretty much everything. Maybe one more comment about the leisure travelers which you've just mentioned. So we saw also last summer, you might remember, in the US, airfares for domestic flights were skyrocketing, and we saw a lot of Americans thinking, oh, why not doing a trip to Europe? So we had a huge demand from the US to Europe. And there, I just would like to add that Zurich is also an excellent airport to connect. So even if you go beyond to Spain, Italy, wherever you go, we have a great airport here in Zurich, which you can connect. And this Swiss quality, which Gieri also mentioned, I think that's something you feel across the board. The way we handle valuable and pharma cargo, or the way I mentioned before, that we have a first and business class compartment, which is really premium. That's something you will feel across the board with our airline. and hopefully also with our staff on board. And therefore, again, coming back to my initial statement, we're very proud to represent the home carrier here in Switzerland and to also represent the Swiss values which we offer. So being a rather small, medium-sized airline, like in a small country, but offering that premium service across the board. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And Gieri, anything you wanted to add before I turn back to our gracious host and the American Swiss Foundation board member, Cameron Wendt?
Thank you. I think Marco said it beautifully, so nothing to add from my side.
Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation for our audience. I appreciate not only the time you've given us, but the work that you're doing day to day to make these services available and to improve the relationships between our two countries. I'm very grateful for that. Cameron, if I could invite you for any closing remarks, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, if I could offer some feedback as you went through the cities that, are connected, there was a notable exception of Denver. So before I put my young kids on the flight to Zurich, maybe we can figure that out. I'll have a little marginal effect on this route, but no, really wanted to thank all of you. I know you're all busy, but this is important and very interesting, and thank you for moderating, Gieri, Marco. Appreciate your time, and hope everyone found this interesting who dialed in today. Perfect. Thanks, everyone.